The SUV hit my ranch gate like a bull through a picket fence, only shinier and with a horn blaring the tune of some pop anthem. Splinters exploded across the dirt driveway, dust cloud billowed up, and there she was, both hands on the wheel, chin jutted forward like she had just liberated Normandy. This was not the first time, not the second time, but the third time that weak Karen from the HOA decided my property line was just a suggestion. I stood there with a mug of coffee, still steaming, wondering if this was real life or if I had accidentally signed up for some reality TV experiment where neighbors try to out-crazy each other. The first time it happened, I thought it was a mistake. People get lost, GPS maps are wonky, and gates sometimes look like they belong to a public road. She drove through, snapped the wood like pretzels, and waved as if she was being courteous. I fixed the gate, chalked it up to bad luck, and figured it would never happen again. But then, the next weekend, her white SUV returned like a ghost. She didn't even slow down, just pressed the pedal and crashed through my brand new repair like she was collecting points. I walked out, jaw hanging, to see her waving again, sunglasses reflecting the morning sun, like she was on parade. That's when I started suspecting this wasn't an accident. This was sport. I tried polite words. That's always step one when neighbors clash. I knocked on her perfectly manicured door in the cul-de-sac, and when she answered, I explained as calmly as possible that the dirt road behind my gate was not, in fact, an HOA shortcut to the lake. She smiled that tight HOA president smile, the kind with teeth but no warmth, and said, "I'll keep that in mind." Which, of course, was code for, not in this lifetime. I left her porch with the uneasy feeling you get when you realize you just played chess with someone who already stole your queen. Then the letters came. Not apologies, not offers to pay for the damage, but HOA violations addressed to me. Apparently, my gate was unsightly, inconsistent with community standards, and posed a traffic hazard. That last one nearly made me choke. My gate was a traffic hazard? To who? The only person hitting it was her, like clockwork. I stacked the letters on my kitchen counter, each one more absurd than the last, until they formed a paper tower leaning like Pisa. I didn't know whether to laugh or burn them in a ceremonial bonfire. The gossip mill kept the tension alive. My neighbor Bob, who pretends to water his lawn twice as long whenever drama brews, told me Karen had bragged at the HOA barbecue that she had a right to use my back road. "It's in the spirit of community access," she said, which apparently means anything she wanted was hers by divine right. By the time I heard that, my patience was fraying like an old rope. What started as broken wood was turning into something bigger, something personal. And I could feel myself crossing a line, from irritated rancher to someone planning a counterstrike. I started noticing details about her. The way she parked across 2 spaces at the grocery store. The way she rolled through stop signs like she was allergic to pausing. The way her laugh carried at HOA meetings whenever someone else got fined for having the wrong shade of curtains. This wasn't just a woman who liked shortcuts. This was a woman who thrived on control, who saw rules as hers to enforce on others but not to obey herself. And suddenly, my little ranch gate was ground zero for a battle of principle. I repaired the gate again, but slower this time, like a soldier fortifying a trench. Each nail I hammered carried a bit of spite. I knew she'd be back. It was only a matter of when. And sure enough, 3 days later, headlights appeared at dusk. The SUV roared, the music thumped, and the wood cracked like thunder. I didn't even flinch. I just watched, coffee in hand again, because at this point I was collecting data. Every hit was another entry in the ledger. And the ledger was growing. The gossip shifted to sympathy. Neighbors who once rolled their eyes at rancher drama began stopping by to shake their heads. One even dropped off a pie, which around here is the unofficial currency of solidarity. "She's going too far," they whispered. "She's making enemies." I knew they were right. But instead of calming me, the whispers fueled me. Because if she was willing to keep escalating, then I had to decide, was I going to keep fixing gates like a fool, or was I going to play the game on her level? That night, lying in bed, I couldn't stop picturing it. Her SUV smashing through again, the sound of splintering would echoing like gunfire. But in my mind, something different happened afterward. Instead of her driving off smugly, something stopped her. Something she never saw coming. I fell asleep with a grin. The kind that creeps in when trouble is brewing and you know you're about to stop being the punching bag. Chapter 1 ends with the air thick with promise. Karen thought she was winning. She thought she was untouchable. But I had just decided to shift the battlefield. And when I did, she wouldn't be driving away smiling. By the time the next HOA meeting rolled around, the air in the room felt charged, like static before a storm. Karen was at the head of the long folding table, her nameplate gleaming like it was forged from some ancient authority. She had a binder in front of her, color-coded tabs sticking out, and she was already flipping through them when I walked in. I wasn't a regular at these meetings, but after 3 demolished gates and a tower of violation letters, I figured it was time to see the empire up close. Karen's voice carried across the room as she welcomed everyone, but her eyes flicked to me like daggers. She knew why I was there. The agenda rambled on about lawn heights and trash placements, but the tension built as neighbors exchanged glances. Then she cleared her throat and dropped it. We need to address the matter of unauthorized structures obstructing community access. I nearly laughed out loud. She was calling my gate unauthorized. A gate that had stood there for decades before her SUV ever rolled into town. I raised my hand, partly for the drama, partly because I knew it would needle her. With all due respect, I said, my ranch isn't HOA property. That gate is on private land. And the only one obstructing anything is the person repeatedly destroying it. The room went silent except for the squeak of Bob's lawn chair as he shifted, waiting for the clash. Karen's smile never wavered, but her knuckles whitened on the binder. She loved a fight, but she hated being called out in public. She fired back with lawyer talk, phrases like easement rights and communal precedent. Most of it was smoke, and everyone in the room knew it. But the way she delivered it made half the board nod along as if she were reading scripture. That was Karen's power, confusing confidence for truth. But I wasn't there to win a debate. I was there to study her tells, her rhythm, the way she manipulated the board. And what I learned was simple. She never expected anyone to challenge her on the ground she had claimed. She relied on people shrugging and walking away. I didn't shrug. I leaned in. If you're so sure, Karen, then maybe we let the county decide. I'll be happy to invite the sheriff to weigh in on whether a private gate is unauthorized. That got murmurs, and for the first time, her smile cracked. She closed the binder with a snap and moved on to the next topic, pretending the matter was settled. But I saw it in her eyes. She wasn't done. She was plotting her next move. Back home, I tried simple fixes first. Heavy chains across the posts, a steel latch, even a camera mounted on the tree line. Each time, she found a way around them. Chains cut. Latch pried open. Camera mysteriously vanished. It was like playing chess against a bulldozer. Subtlety meant nothing. She wasn't sneaky. She was relentless. And every failed fix only fueled her arrogance. She wanted me to believe I couldn't stop her, that the gate would always be hers to break. Then came the letter from the HOA lawyer, written on heavy paper with a stamp that tried very hard to look official. It claimed I was obstructing community access and demanded immediate removal of my gate. The absurdity was so rich I read it aloud to my cows, who seemed just as unimpressed as I was. But still, it stung. Not because I believed it, but because it confirmed what I already suspected. Karen was escalating, pulling every lever she could to force me out. It stopped being about the gate right then. This wasn't about wood and nails anymore. This was about control. She wanted to prove that no matter where I lived, no matter how far my ranch stretched, she could dictate the terms. That was the real game, and the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. The only way to win was not by building a stronger gate, but by setting a trap so perfect that when she drove into it, she'd trap herself. The neighbors noticed my shift. Instead of frustration, I started moving with purpose. I stayed up late sketching plans, measuring posts, calculating weight and angles. They saw lights on in my barn at odd hours, heard the buzz of tools, and started whispering that I was up to something. Some offered to help, not out of loyalty, but because everyone wanted to see Karen knocked off her pedestal. There's a special kind of unity born out of shared annoyance, and Karen was uniting the neighborhood faster than any HOA policy ever could. One night, Bob stopped by with a six-pack and a grin. "Tell me you're cooking something good," he said, eyeing the half-assembled contraption in the barn. I shrugged. "Just fixing the gate." He laughed so hard he nearly dropped the beer. Word spread. Neighbors leaned on fences, exchanged knowing looks, and while no one asked directly, they all seemed invested in the outcome. It was no longer just my battle. It was a quiet rebellion. The more I worked, the clearer my vision became. This wasn't revenge for revenge's sake. This was about balance, about restoring the natural order of neighborly respect. Karen had built her empire on intimidation and manipulation, but every empire has cracks. And I was done patching fences. I was building the fall that would remind her she wasn't untouchable. By the end of Chapter 2, the war lines were drawn. Karen with her SUV, her HOA army, and her endless arrogance. Me with my stubbornness, my tools, and the silent support of a neighborhood that was waiting for a show. The gate wasn't just wood anymore, it was the stage. And soon, the curtain was going to rise. The first real plan came to me at 3 in the morning, the kind of hour when your brain is either dreaming or scheming. I lay awake staring at the ceiling beams of my ranch house, listening to the quiet hum of the night, and suddenly I saw it clear as day. If she insisted on smashing through a gate, then I would build one designed to smash back. Not with violence, but with consequence. A gate that looked like an easy target but carried a hidden punch. That thought kept me awake until sunrise, and by the time the rooster crowed I was already sketching ideas on a notepad. At first my ideas were ridiculous. A moat filled with water that would swallow her SUV whole. A paint cannon rigged to coat her windshield in neon pink the moment she pushed through. A hydraulic lift that would send her car teetering like a carnival ride. I laughed at myself, imagining Karen explaining to the sheriff why her car was dangling 10 feet in the air with glitter on the roof. As funny as it was, I knew I needed something grounded. It had to work, it had to hold up in front of witnesses, and most importantly, it had to expose her arrogance in a way she couldn't talk herself out of. So I started small. I built a decoy gate just a few feet behind the main posts. The front would look like the same old wood she'd grown used to shattering, but behind it was a frame reinforced with steel bars I welded together. The idea was simple. She'd hit it expecting splinters, but instead her bumper would crumple like a soda can. The challenge was making it look ordinary. I sanded and stained planks, rubbed them with dirt, even added a few fake cracks to keep up the illusion. From the road, it looked fragile. From behind, it was a fortress. But something about it didn't feel quite right. It was effective, sure, but too blunt. If her SUV got wrecked, she'd play the victim, cry about damages, and probably drag me into court. What I wanted was undeniable proof of her trespassing and destruction, something that couldn't be twisted. So I scrapped the steel frame idea and started thinking about traps that told stories instead of just breaking things. That's when the idea of the paint came back, only this time with more purpose. What if, instead of smashing her car, I marked it? A burst of paint across her hood, bright and obvious, so that anyone in town could see what she'd done. She couldn't hide it, couldn't spin it. Her SUV would be a billboard of her guilt. The thought electrified me. I spent the next few nights experimenting with rigs in the barn, setting up pressurized canisters, testing triggers that would activate when the gate posts were forced apart. My first attempt sprayed paint too soon, drenching the dirt. Another clogged and sputtered uselessly. But with each failure I got closer to something precise, something inevitable. Neighbors started noticing the extra hours I spent tinkering. Bob showed up again, leaning in the doorway of the barn with that smirk of his. "Looks like mad scientist work in here," he said, nodding toward the tangle of hoses and valves. I told him it was just irrigation repair, but he didn't buy it. He winked and left without pressing. The funny thing was, the more secretive I acted, the more the neighborhood seemed to rally. People who barely spoke to me before started waving on the road, slowing their cars as if they wanted to be part of whatever was coming. Karen had built her kingdom on fear, but now curiosity was undoing her. As my plan refined, I realized one trap wasn't enough. Karen was cunning in her own stubborn way, and if one trick failed she'd just adapt. So I layered the setup. First came the decoy gate, flimsy enough to break but hiding pressure sensors. Behind it, I rigged paint canisters aimed squarely at bumper height, filled with a fluorescent orange so bright it could be seen from orbit. And just in case she tried to deny everything, I added the pièce de résistance. A hidden camera tucked into the tree line, disguised as a birdhouse. It would capture everything: the headlights approaching, the crash, the burst of paint, and her face behind the wheel. A perfect package of evidence. The night I tested the whole system felt like preparing for battle. I rigged weights to simulate the push of a car, checked the angles of the nozzles, and ran back to the barn to watch the footage on a monitor. The gate burst open, the paint exploded in a glorious arc, and the camera caught it all in sharp detail. For the first time in weeks, I felt ahead of her. Not just patching damage, but setting the stage. But as satisfying as the trap was, I couldn't ignore the unease in my gut. There was risk here. If it backfired, I'd look like the lunatic building contraptions in the woods. If it succeeded, Karen would come at me harder than ever. I sat on my porch that night staring at the gate, wondering if I was crossing a line I couldn't step back from. Yet the memory of her SUV smashing through again and again, the smug wave, the stack of HOA letters, those were the fuel. She had dragged me into this game, and now I had no choice but to play to win. The next few days stretched like taffy. Every time headlights appeared down the road, my pulse quickened. Sometimes it was just a neighbor, sometimes a delivery truck. Each false alarm tightened the anticipation until I felt like a coiled spring. My cows didn't care, chewing their cud as if nothing was amiss, but I knew it was only a matter of time before Karen returned. She couldn't resist. The gate was her obsession as much as mine now. One afternoon, as I double-checked the birdhouse camera, a neighbor strolled up. It was Linda, the quiet woman from 2 doors down who never spoke much at meetings. She glanced at the gate, then back at me, and said softly, "She thinks she's untouchable. Don't let her be." Then she walked away without another word. It was the closest thing to encouragement I'd gotten, and it lit something in me. This wasn't just my fight anymore. Everyone wanted to see the queen toppled. I added finishing touches that night, extra supports on the posts, fresh batteries for the camera, and a final test of the pressure sensors. Everything hummed in readiness. I stood there in the dark, the crickets chirping, the smell of cut grass in the air, and I could almost hear the future unfolding. The stage was set. All that was left was for Karen to take the bait. Of course, life doesn't move on our timetable. She didn't come that night, or the next, or even the next. Each morning I checked the footage, half relieved and half disappointed. My trap sat waiting, loaded with paint and tension, like a coiled snake. The stillness became its own kind of torture. But then, just as I started to wonder if she'd gotten wise, I found fresh tire tracks near the edge of the road, her SUV's tread pattern unmistakable. She was circling, testing. The game was alive. By the end of that week, I wasn't just maintaining a trap. I was maintaining a countdown. Karen had to make her move eventually. And when she did, she wouldn't just be hitting a gate anymore. She'd be colliding with her own arrogance, captured in living color. That thought kept me steady, even as the waiting gnawed at me. The curtain was ready. The audience was restless. And Karen, whether she knew it or not, was walking straight into the spotlight I'd built just for her. The night it finally happened wasn't dramatic at first. It was one of those muggy evenings where the air hangs heavy, and the cicadas drone like 1,000 tiny engines. I sat on the porch with a beer sweating in my hand, the gate visible just beyond the tree line. The contraption was ready, primed like a sleeping beast, and all I could do was wait. I had almost convinced myself it might not happen, that maybe Karen had finally grown bored or found a new victim. But just past 11, I saw it. Headlights bouncing through the darkness, moving too fast, too familiar. My stomach knotted. This was it. Showtime. The SUV came barreling down the road, the same pop song thumping through the windows, and I swear the crickets stopped chirping for a second. I leaned forward in my chair, beer forgotten, eyes locked on the gate. She didn't slow down, not even a little. The arrogance was almost impressive. She hit the posts, and in that instant, the trap woke up. The wooden planks splintered with their usual crack, but instead of giving way to a clean path, the pressure sensors triggered, the valves released, and a geyser of fluorescent orange paint exploded across the front of her SUV. The effect was glorious. It wasn't just a splash, it was a flood, coating the hood, the windshield, even streaking the roof in streaks so bright they glowed under the headlights. Her wipers flailed uselessly, smearing the mess into a glowing smear, and her SUV swerved, screeched, and finally came to a lopsided stop halfway into my driveway. For a second, silence. Then the horn blared, long and angry, like the world owed her an apology. I stayed where I was, calm as stone, while the birdhouse camera blinked red, capturing every frame. She stumbled out of the driver's seat, coughing in the paint mist, and looked at her once pristine SUV. Her scream cut through the night, high-pitched and furious. "You'll pay for this," she shrieked, pointing a dripping finger at me. But the sight of her, covered in orange flecks, hair sticking out in chaotic strands, was more pitiful than intimidating. It was like watching a cat fall in a bathtub. Neighbors came out. First Bob, then Linda, then a few more, drawn by the noise. They stood on porches, leaning on fences, watching the scene like it was a summer play. Karen, realizing she had an audience, tried to spin it. "This man attacked me," she shouted, gesturing wildly at the gate, the paint, the evidence literally dripping off her car. "He set a trap. It's criminal." But the neighbors weren't buying it. They'd seen her antics too many times. Bob muttered loud enough for everyone to hear, "Looks like you drove into it all by yourself." Laughter rippled across the dark. I finally stood, walking down the porch steps slow, deliberate, the way you do when you've got the upper hand and want the world to know it. "Karen," I said, voice steady, "you've been smashing through my gate for weeks. I've asked you to stop. I've fixed it each time. Tonight, you proved to everyone exactly what you've been doing." I pointed at the birdhouse, and the camera caught all of it. Every second. Her face froze. For the first time, she wasn't just angry, she looked cornered. She sputtered something about easements, about rights, but her words fell flat against the orange glare of her SUV. The neighbors murmured, snapping photos with their phones, documenting the downfall of the Queen. In the age of gossip, proof was currency, and I had just minted gold. The next day, the footage spread faster than wildfire. I didn't share it myself. I didn't need to. The neighbors had already passed it along, and by morning, half the HOA board had seen it. Karen tried damage control, calling emergency meetings, waving around more lawyer letters, but the paint on her SUV told the story louder than she could spin. The once pristine suburban general had been reduced to a clown car, and no one could unsee it. But the real twist came when the county sheriff showed up. Not at my door, at hers. Turns out, one of the neighbors had sent the footage to the authorities, and what Karen had been doing wasn't just petty harassment. It was trespassing, property damage, and reckless endangerment. The law that she had wielded like a sword suddenly turned on her. Watching her argue with the sheriff on her lawn, still with faint orange streaks on her driveway, was the kind of justice you don't plan, you just savor. At the next HOA meeting, the atmosphere was electric. Karen sat in her usual seat, but the binder in front of her looked limp, and the smug smile was gone. The board whispered among themselves, glancing at her, then at me, then back at their papers. When the floor opened, Linda spoke up first. Quiet Linda, who rarely said more than a sentence, raised her voice clear. "This isn't about a gate anymore. This is about abuse of power. We all saw what happened. We all know what's been going on. It's time for a change." Applause broke out, not loud at first, but steady, spreading through the room until even Bob was clapping. Karen sat rigid, hands gripping the edges of her binder like a lifeline. But the tide had turned. She wasn't the enforcer anymore. She was the spectacle. Still, victory wasn't as clean as I imagined. After the meeting, a few board members pulled me aside. They warned me Karen might still fight, that she wasn't the type to slink away quietly. I knew they were right. People like her didn't just quit. They doubled down, even when they were cornered. And that nagging unease returned, reminding me that a wounded animal is often the most dangerous. Sure enough, the following week she tried one last gambit. A letter slid under my door, handwritten this time, not typed on HOA stationery. It accused me of harassment, threatened lawsuits, and promised she'd see me ruined. But the tone was different. Desperate, unhinged. Not the words of a queen protecting her throne, but of someone watching her empire crumble. I tucked it into the pile of past letters, another brick in the monument of her downfall. By then, the neighborhood had shifted. People who once cowered under her fines now walked taller, bolder. Lawns were mowed a little less precisely. Trash cans left out an extra hour without fear. It was as if the whole street had exhaled after years of holding its breath. And though I knew Karen wasn't finished, I also knew she had lost the one thing she valued most: control. That night, I sat on my porch again, looking at the gate. It stood intact, freshly painted, not a splinter out of place. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel tension every time headlights passed. The trap had done its job. The paint had told the story. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the final chapter hadn't been written yet. Karen wasn't gone. She was just licking her wounds. And when she came back, it wouldn't be with an SUV and bravado. It would be with something sharper, something meant to sting. The war wasn't over. But the battlefield had changed. And I was no longer the one on defense. The morning after the paint-splattered spectacle, the neighborhood was different. You could feel it in the way people carried themselves, the looseness in their shoulders, the smirks they didn't bother hiding anymore. Karen's SUV sat in her driveway like a trophy of her own undoing, orange streaks glaring in the sun, a symbol everyone could see from the main road. Kids on bikes pointed and laughed as they rode past, and even the mailman slowed down, shaking his head like he'd just witnessed a local landmark collapse. 4 years, Karen had been the sheriff of our cul-de-sac, and now she was the punchline. But like I'd expected, she wasn't gone. Not yet. Karen never accepted defeat gracefully, and her pride was louder than reason. Within days, she was filing complaints, waving letters, claiming the paint trap had been an assault. Her binder, once a tool of intimidation, was now stuffed with frantic pages, printouts, and highlighted passages that didn't quite line up. She stormed into meetings, cornered neighbors on sidewalks, and demanded they rally to her defense. But the spell was broken. Where once people nodded out of fear, now they gave polite shrugs or excuses to get back inside. Watching her flail was like watching a queen who had lost her crown but still tried to sit on the throne. The county sheriff didn't buy her story either. He came by my ranch again, this time not to warn me but to check the footage, ask a few follow-up questions, and close the case. "She's been warned," he said, flipping his notebook shut. "If she pushes again, it won't be a civil matter anymore." That reassurance carried weight. For the first time since this started, the law was on my side. It wasn't just me standing against her. It was the community and the county both. But Karen wasn't one to retreat quietly. Her secret weapon wasn't the SUV or even the HOA title. It was her persistence. And so came the twist no one saw coming. Karen had been gunning for more than just a shortcut through my land. She had her eye on it. A developer, it turned out, had sniffed around the ranch months earlier, talking about expanding community access and future property value. Karen had been cozying up to them, pushing the idea that the HOA could acquire my land, turn the back road into an official access point, and fold my ranch into their jurisdiction. Every smashed gate, every violation letter, every smear of authority. Those weren't random acts of cruelty. They were her campaign to wear me down until I sold. The revelation hit like a sucker punch. It wasn't just pettiness. It was ambition. She wanted control of the land itself, the whole ranch, to pad her empire. But the irony was delicious. By overplaying her hand, she'd exposed herself. The neighbors, once oblivious, now knew the game she'd been running. And instead of standing behind her, they turned on her. Even the other board members, her supposed loyalists, started to question why their president was dragging them into a losing war. The final reckoning came at the HOA election. It wasn't supposed to be exciting. HOA elections are usually dull affairs, with more cookies than votes, but this time the meeting hall was packed. Word had spread, and the footage of her paint-coated SUV had done the campaigning for me. I didn't even run for office. I just sat in the back, arms crossed, watching the theater unfold. Candidate after candidate stood up, speaking about transparency, fairness, respect. All coded ways of saying, "We're done with Karen." When the votes were counted, she lost not by a slim margin, but by a landslide so big even she couldn't spin it. She sat there, binder limp in her lap, eyes darting around the room like she might find one last ally. But there were none. The applause that followed wasn't just for the winners, it was for the end of her reign. For the first time in years, people in the neighborhood smiled freely, not worried about whether their shutters were an approved shade of beige. The HOA had been liberated from its tyrant, and I had front row seats. But my satisfaction wasn't just in her downfall. It was in the subtle shift that rippled through the community. Neighbors who had avoided eye contact now stopped by with hellos. Kids played in yards without parents glancing nervously at their watches. Even the fences seemed less rigid, less polished, as if everyone collectively realized they didn't need to live in fear of perfection. My ranch, once the target of Karen's crusade, became a kind of landmark for resistance. A place where someone finally stood up and refused to bow. Karen tried, of course, to claw back some dignity. She filed appeals, whispered about conspiracies, and even left a note on my mailbox one night claiming this isn't over. But the truth was, it was. Without the HOA presidency, without the power to fine and intimidate, she was just another neighbor with an orange-stained SUV and a reputation that couldn't be scrubbed clean. Her empire had collapsed not with a bang, but with laughter. And nothing eats at someone like Karen more than being laughed at. As for me, I kept the gate. Not just as a barrier, but as a symbol. I repaired it one last time, painted it solid, and left the faintest trace of orange on the posts as a reminder. The birdhouse camera stayed, too, not because I thought she'd try again, but because I liked the idea of the quiet witness, always watching, always ready. My land was mine again, not a battlefield, but a home. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Bob came by with another six-pack. He dropped it on the porch, grinning like the whole saga had been the best entertainment he'd had in years. "You know," he said, cracking open a bottle, "they're calling it the Great Gate War down at the diner." I laughed, shaking my head, but I couldn't help feeling a little pride. Not because I wanted fame, but because I'd turned the story around. Karen thought she could break me. Instead, she broke herself. The months that followed were quiet. Karen kept to herself, her SUV eventually repainted, but the stain on her reputation never washed off. The neighborhood meetings became normal again, boring in the best way, full of talk about landscaping budgets instead of power struggles. And my ranch? It thrived. With the pressure gone, I found joy in the small things again. Fixing fence posts without spite, feeding the cattle without looking over my shoulder, walking the land without the weight of conflict. Sometimes, late at night, I'd sit on the porch and think about how close it had come to breaking me. The smashed gates, the endless letters, the constant sense of being under siege. It could have worn me down, and maybe that had been her plan all along. But instead, it forced me to fight back, to outthink her, to refuse to fold. In a strange way, Karen gave me a gift. She reminded me that boundaries aren't just physical. They're about respect, dignity, and the refusal to let someone else write your story. And so, the saga ended not with Karen's victory, not with my defeat, but with a balance restored. My gate stood tall, my land secure, and the community freer than it had been in years. Karen might still simmer in her house, binder full of lost battles, but the world had moved on without her. And every time I looked at that gate, I couldn't help but smile. Because behind its simple wooden frame, it carried the memory of a fight well fought, a queen dethroned, and the stubborn truth that sometimes the best traps are the ones that let people catch themselves.